We've just confirmed an appointment and we're going to show up on site to do an inspection. And when we show up on site, once again, we are equipped with the protocol. And this sort of, at least in our area, before we even get there, we know that there are a number of, we call them the bad three risk, but we know there's going to be a number of things that we find in virtually every ecosystem that we go into. And so the protocol sort of guides us in that direction. And we're going to be using, here's where we bring ANSI into. ANSI Part 1, our pruning standard, tracing where we remove loose bark. Part 2 is soil and soil management, assessment, modification, drainage, and fertilization. We have Part 5, which is establishing customer objectives, what they want, and the sort of mitigation involved. And Part 9 that you're going to rely on very heavily, which is your tree structure and your tree hazard assessment that you're going to use level 1, 2, and 3. We'll get into that right now in a minute. Now here are the common tree risks that we run into. You can see that they're all centered around the bottom of the tree. A lot of the time, 70% of the survival of a tree is dependent upon the ground in which it's planted. And so every tree has its place and space, and we look very carefully at these practices. You've seen the kind of conditions that we're faced with around the base of the trees. You can see the picture of this big white oak beside the gas tank, and after we had the gas tank removed and we looked at it, it was a spectacular looking tree. The foliage was beautiful, it was full, but once we got down to the bottom we found out that it was buried by 3 feet, and there are a number of ANSI standards that we called upon in order to justify the act that we took, and they start with Part 1, pruning. Now I'm going to read some of these things. You can read them for yourselves. They're up there in front of you on the screen, and reasons for pruning include reducing risk, improving or maintaining health, developing desired structure and appearance, preventing interference with the built environment, and other specific objectives. In particular, on this job, we used tracing, which was the removal of loose damaged tissue in and around the wound, Part 1. Part 2 was soil management assessments. You can see that in this case, it was a lot of red clay, it was very thick, it was non-porous, and it was beginning to rot the tree. This tree was a huge hazard in its as-is condition, especially right there beside the gas tank. You could have had a very bad situation. So you can read all of the standards right there. I'm not going to go through them with you, but read them and you'll see that soil modification shall include, and shall is a requirement, should is not. And you're going to see mulch shall not be placed against the tree trunks or cover the root flares. One or more of the soil management objectives shall be specified. You're going to find a lot of that language in there, and so pay attention to the difference between shall and should. Part 5 was during site planning, construction, or development, and every place we go is in some stage of planning, development, or construction. And so conservation is the deliberate retention, protection, replanting, and management of existing forest, trees, shrubs, or plants during the development process. It defines the critical root zone, and you're going to see that we'll rely on this one standard here to create jobs again and again and again, and it's right there at the bottom. When the distance of 6 to 18 times the trunk diameter cannot be met, appropriate mitigation or determination that the work will not impact tree health and sustainability shall be performed. That's a job. Anytime you see mitigation required, that's a job. Mitigation is a job. Mitigation is soil control. Mitigation is removal of loose damaged material. Mitigation is over competition in the critical root zone. Part 9 is the type of assessment that you're going to perform when you go there for your first appointment. Because when you go there, all you have is a bucket full of diagnostic tools that we showed you previously, and many times you are not going to be able to see all of the roots. Now, a level 2 assessment shall include a 360-degree ground-based visual inspection of the tree crown, trunk flare, above ground roots, and site conditions around the tree in relation to the targets. In other words, if it's a big tree, we're called on many times to take care of big trees because the target value is very critical. They're big enough, heavy enough, and close enough to the houses and property where they can do real damage if they fail, and everyone wants to know what kind of condition they're in. And if you look down at the bottom of the tree and you can't see the buttress roots, and buttress roots are defined in Part 8 of the ANSI Standards in Root Management, then you have the opportunity to ask the customer a question. Would you like for me to guess at how stable this tree is, or do you want to know? And the answer is almost always going to come back, I really want to know. And so if it is, then you're going to have to do a root collar excavation, and most of the time you're going to have to factor that into a job quote. That's part of the mitigation that you're going to see. And so in the protocol phase 2, where we evaluate, create, and cooperate, the conditions we most often find are root collar excavations and concealed buttress roots, where people are asking us how safe is the tree, and we cannot answer that question until we can visually inspect the anchor root of the tree, the buttress roots, the flare. Most of the time it's covered by erosion, volcano mulching, and other bad cultural practices. The one picture that I showed you earlier, the tree was buried by 3 feet of fill beside a gas bottle 10 feet away from the house, and this happened to be a 60-foot tree. This root collar excavation that you see here exposed a tree that did not have 2 anchors. The small tree that you see pictured here has a 3-inch diameter, and when we put the air tool to it and did some supersonic aeration, we were able to not only expose the root collar, but we were able to aerate, decompact, incorporate, and do topsoil management all at the same time. And so for evaluate, create, and cooperate, you're going to suggest a number of actions to take. And in this director's cut, I'm going to go into 3 cases that we were called upon to solve in just the last 2 or 3 weeks leading up to this show. And I'm not going to use names, but I'm going to use some specific examples and some current pictures of exactly what we did.